Hello, and thanks for joining us for this news update. We have a lot to get to. The U.S. Federal Reserve just made a major call on interest rates that you'll want to hear about. We're also covering the fallout from a really chaotic Africa Cup of Nations final. Plus, an emotional story from boxer Anthony Joshua, who's opening up about a personal tragedy. We'll finish things off with the latest stories out of North America, so let's get right to it. We're going to start in West Africa with a developing story. There's been a violent attack on a military base in Niger, and unfortunately, it's resulted in a tragic loss of life. This is a really serious situation. Officials in Niger are now confirming that a military base located right at the international airport in the capital, Niamey, was attacked. And the clash was intense. It left 4 soldiers and 20 of the attackers dead. This is definitely a major event for the region and one we'll be keeping a close eye on. All right, let's do a quick run-through of some other big stories happening around the globe. First up, in a pretty big move, the European Union has now officially labeled Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization. At the same time, we're seeing a rare moment of cooperation between Russia and Ukraine. They've just conducted their first exchange of fallen soldiers' remains in several months. And finally, some really troubling news for aid efforts in Yemen. The World Food Program has had to stop all of its operations in the north because of ongoing harassment from Houthi forces, which, of course, leaves a lot of vulnerable people without that critical support. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about the world of finance. Honestly, all eyes were on the U.S. Federal Reserve this week for a huge announcement, one that could really impact the economy. So what was the big decision? Well, the Fed has decided to keep its main interest rate exactly where it is. This basically means they're hitting pause on that series of rate cuts we saw last year. They're taking a wait-and-see approach, just wanting to see how the economy does before they make any other moves. Let's dig into these numbers for a second, because the details here are really telling. So the interest rate is staying put between 3.5% and 3.75%. But here's what's really interesting. It wasn't a unanimous vote. 2 members of the committee actually wanted to cut the rate, which tells you there's some debate going on behind the scenes. And that quote from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, it's a big one. He's pretty much saying, not so fast. The data just doesn't support making it cheaper to borrow money right now. Definitely a story to keep watching. Now, we have a story from the world of sports that is just truly heartbreaking. The boxing champion Anthony Joshua has spoken out for the very first time about a deep personal tragedy that has absolutely shaken him. In a really raw and emotional video he posted, the former 2-time heavyweight champ was visibly fighting back tears as he talked about losing 2 people who were so much more than just his team. They were his family. He really made it clear that their bond went way, way beyond the boxing ring. And the details of what happened are just devastating. A fatal car crash in Nigeria late last month. Their vehicle hit a stationary truck. His personal trainer, Lateef Ayodele, and his recovery therapist, Sinagami, both tragically lost their lives. Joshua was in the car as a passenger, and now he's mourning his close friends, while the driver of that vehicle is facing some very serious criminal charges. Our thoughts are definitely with everyone affected by this. From one emotional sports story to another, let's turn our attention to international football. The Confederation of African Football has just come down hard, and I mean hard, with huge sanctions after a chaotic and controversial Africa Cup of Nations final that had everybody talking. Yeah, we are talking about more than $1 million in fines, split between the football federations of Senegal and Morocco. And why? Well, because that final match on January 18th, it was a complete mess. We're talking protests, scuffles, and just some really bizarre, unsportsmanlike behavior that's kind of left a black mark on the tournament. This slide really breaks down the penalties, and the details are just wild. So Senegal got hit with a bigger fine, mostly because their entire team, led by their coach, just walked off the field to protest a penalty call. But Morocco's fine includes something I've never heard of before. Their ball boys were repeatedly trying to snatch the Senegal goalkeeper's towel. That alone cost them a massive $200,000 fine. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. And it doesn't just stop with the fines either. There are some major suspensions being handed down. Senegal's coach, Pape Thiaw, is now banned for 5 games. And some of the biggest players on both teams, guys like Morocco's Achraf Hakimi and Senegal's Ismail Assar, they're going to be sitting out of future African games. These are huge blows for both teams, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they bounce back from this. All right, to wrap things up today, let's head over to North America, where we've got 2 major stories developing that are affecting communities in very different ways. First, we're going to northern Quebec, where the Cree Nation of Mississini is just reeling from a shocking act of violence.
Provincial police are now investigating a shooting that left 2 men dead and has put the whole community on edge. And early on, it looks like this could be linked to organized crime, which is a really concerning development for such a remote community.
In the aftermath, the community's chief, Michael Petawabano, released this heartfelt statement of support for the victims' families. And while everyone is understandably shaken up, police are trying to reassure residents that this seems to be an isolated incident with no ongoing threat to public safety. It's a small comfort, I'm sure, during a really difficult time. Now, for a bit of good news coming out of the southern United States. Communities there have been just battered by a severe winter storm. But the utility company Entergy is reporting they've made some real progress. They've restored power to more than 55% of their customers, which is a real glimmer of hope for folks who've been stuck in the cold and the dark. But let's be clear, the toll this storm has taken is just devastating. We're talking more than 1 million people losing power across the country, and tragically, at least 115 deaths have now been linked to this massive storm system. Crews are out there working around the clock trying to get everybody back online, especially in the hardest-hit areas in Louisiana and Mississippi. The hope is to have full service restored by this weekend, and we're all pulling for them to get it done. And that will do it for this news update. We'll be back in 24 hours with the latest on all these stories and more. Thanks so much for tuning in, and hey, if you found this update useful, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe so you can stay informed. Until next time, stay safe.